Montreal and forwards. I know there's a lot of talk about the Montreal D. I know Nick Hague's been linked to them, and I could see it absolutely. But I've heard a little bit about upgrading at forward too. So Montreal is another team that I've heard with that specifically. And I think some of that focus could be on, who do they envision playing with Demidov for a while? Is there somebody out there that they would look at and say, those are two people that could grow together a little bit? So that's kind of what I'm looking forward for Montreal. Now, we're going to talk a little bit more about the Combine for the final thought, like some of the questions that were asked. But those were some of the teams I heard a lot more of coming out of there. Mammoth, Kraken, Canadians at forward, and we'll see where we go.
I guess with Montreal, when they got into the playoffs, the first round against Washington, maybe a little bit unexpected with how much production they got out of Dvorak and Anderson and Brendan Gallagher, which was great to kind of help balance out their lineup. But I suppose you're right, long term, that's not likely to be an option for them. So trying to seek ways to improve them in that part of their lineup as they project out 2 to 3 and even beyond years there makes a lot of sense from Montreal's perspective. Because at the top, you think they're in a really good spot.
They're fine.
Sign Jake Evans. Going to be great. Lower in the lineup and killing penalties for you. Right in the middle of there, I could see being a huge priority for them.
Like Dvorak is a free agent, right? So you're looking at, just like everybody else, you're looking for a 2C, but not only that, you're looking for a 2C to play with Demidov. Like in the playoffs last year, Dvorak, Anderson, and Gallagher was your second line, and deservedly. But ultimately, you see Demidov as that guy with someone else. By the way, Kyle, we've also talked about how this was the one meeting or sort of get-together for everyone since they won't be at the draft. I had a team that brought up to me, and I forgot about this. There's another one coming up. It's not as big, but it got a lot of attendance last year. And there's an agent, Dan Milstein, who brings all of his clients, draft-eligible clients, down to Florida. And he did it last year, and he's doing it again this year from June 20th to 23rd. And it sounds like almost everyone is going. Calgary last year, one of their top prospects is Matt Vagridin, who they took in the first round. They went and took a long look at him at this camp last year. That's not what tipped the scales or anything like that made them take him, but they really liked him, and that was another place where they got a chance to see him. And we were talking about on our pod that was the one get-together. Like I said, I had a couple teams reach out and say there'll be a lot of teams at this one too. Because it's a place where you can see a lot of prospects, and the teams last year felt it was valuable.
All right, last pod we talked about Gavin McKenna a little bit, Elliot, and it's kind of been an ongoing conversation throughout the year because of how brilliant he's been, and you can only imagine how in demand he would be if he was to choose to go the NCAA route next season, not draft eligible until 2026. You got some interesting feedback after our last pod, or just some comments anyways, about where he could be going and just the intrigue around the player in general.
I just wanted to say, there's some things that, there's some times it's hard to realize, because social media is the mob now, nobody controls the mob, right? It's hard to predict sometimes. There are times I say, oh, I'm going to drop this on the pod, I'm going to write this in my notes, and it's going to be massive, and nobody cares. And I'm like, boy, was I totally wrong about that. And there's other times where I drop things on the pod or in the notes, and nobody's going to care about this. And all of a sudden, it's a gigantic fiasco with 4 million impressions. And I said, wow, I didn't think that was going to be a thing at all. So you have to be prepared for anything. I have to say the McKenna stuff and the reaction to it, it's a big deal. And maybe I kind of knew that already, but the amount of feedback I got on it was massive. Like, this is big news where he's going to play next year. And again, because I'm not watching the juniors or the NCAA as much as I'm watching the NHL, maybe I didn't take it seriously enough. I don't know. But where this kid's going to play next season, there's a lot of interest in that, a ton of interest in that. And, you know, and as I said on the pod, I asked a bunch of people, and the name they came up to was Penn State. But I think, and we'll see if that turns out to be true or that turns out to be incorrect. But Kyle, the thing that really stood out to me was how many of people wanted to talk to me more about, you know, what didn't you report? How much more do you know?
But yeah, that was what's really going on.
What's really going on. And to be honest, they're like, people, and Kyle and Dom know this, I'm not that deep. Like, I'm very superficial. So there's not much more to me, really. So, but it was really fascinating. It was, you know, sometimes when you're not in that sphere, because there are some people, and for example, Sam Cosentino and Jason Buchla from our place, who are really in that sphere, along with some, there's Scott Wheeler, there's Corey Prodman, there's Cam Robinson, there's a whole bunch of people out there who really do prospects. I obviously don't. So they probably would say you should have known what the reaction would be, but I was surprised and I was impressed at how many people cared about that.
Yeah, it does make a lot of sense. Average over 2 points per game in the regular season, over 2 points in the playoffs, 6 points in 4 games at the Memorial Cup. I mean, nearly helped lug the Tigers to the Memorial Cup championship before falling to London in the final. For a guy that, again, is still 1 year away from being eligible to be taken. Like, you think about all the brilliant things that Connor McDavid accomplished in the Ontario Hockey League, that part of his life and career, and what Gavin McKenna is doing is, Sidney Crosby too, for that matter, but what Gavin McKenna is doing is just something really, really impressive there. Dallas, Elliot, the coaching search, as we talked about, another name we should consider.
Yes, Kyle. So Texas lost to Abbotsford in the Western Conference Final of the AHL playoffs. So it's Abbotsford against Charlotte for the Calder Cup. And Dallas is going to have a big decision to make. We talked a little bit about Neil Graham last pod, their coach with the Texas Stars. Dallas is going to have a decision to make here about, whether or not he's ready now, or what do they do with him now? Keep him behind the bench in Texas, promote him to the big team. What do they do? Like, I think there's a realization there that they may lose him if he's not the guy. But another name that was mentioned to me is another current member of their staff in the NHL, and that is Alain Nasreddine. They said that he will be interviewed if he hasn't been interviewed already. I don't know the answer to this, but it was suspected by a couple people that Nasreddine may have interviewed elsewhere this year. But the feeling there is, and may have interviewed elsewhere this year. I do think potentially some other teams in the aftermath of DeBoer being fired reached out to Dallas to ask what Nasreddine's situation is. And I think for now, they're telling people he's part of our search. So, and it also fits, Nasreddine, who's been around a long time, was interim in New Jersey during a coaching change before Lindy Ruff was hired. So he has a tiny bit of experience as a head coach, although those are always very difficult situations. But, we'd mentioned that do not be surprised if Dallas goes different or fresh. And I had a couple people say to me, you should add Nasreddine to your list, that it's not impossible he ends up the next head coach of the Stars.
Yeah. Makes a lot of sense, especially with Jim Nils saying they're looking externally and internally as they now begin a search, as you say, that a few weeks back they didn't anticipate they would be embarking on. All right, so Elliot, last pod we talked about the Vegas Golden Knights, Alex Pietrangelo, what his future could look like health-wise, and when we may, if we may see him in uniform for the Golden Knights next year. And now rumors out there with William Karlsson potentially being out there on the trade block. What are you hearing in that regard?
Yeah, so again, like I always want to stress this. As many of you who follow hockey, especially on social media, there's a lot of crazy stuff flying around at this time of year. And sometimes even for us who deal in it, it's hard to separate fact from fiction. And so I'm not interested in fighting anyone that's got William Karlsson's name out there. To be honest, I don't know really where it came from. I will, all I'm going to say is that I got pushback from teams about Karlsson. Now, I haven't spoken to Vegas directly, and it's always possible, and I stress this, always possible that Vegas may be talking to one or two specific teams about him that I haven't found. But I will say, I asked a few people about Karlsson, and either they told me they're not under the impression he's available, or I suspect in at least one or two cases, they asked and were told no. They didn't come right out and say it, but the kind of way they talked about it